Socratic kindergartners foil school bus jacking by asking too many questions. They would have had me after 3 choruses of, why? I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie. Why? And this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness of packing into classrooms and college campuses around the world. Before we start, I want to take a moment to thank our new sponsor, Mike Lindell and MyPillow. We are a growing show. We're a show with a lot of opportunity. There's nothing like us on the air. And for a company like MyPillow to allow us to partner with them is a good thing. I think that good things are ahead for both MyPillow and for the Dr. Duke Show. You've heard of his signature pillow? Well, now they've got towels, bed sheets, bathrobes, even dog beds. And when you can, just use the promo code Dr. Duke, D-R-D-U-K-E, one word, D-R-D-U-K-E. Mike Lindell is a great patriot, and patriots need to support one another. So please head over to mypillow.com, get some great pillows and all sorts of bedroom bling, and help out the Dr. Duke Show. All right, today we start in South Carolina, where a man is behind bars after attempting to hijack a school bus with little kids on board. Apparently, the little kids all went kindergarten cop on the assaulter, and they surrounded him and started asking him questions. Are you going to hurt the bus driver? Why do you is that a real gun in your hand? Are you in the Army? And it didn't take long before 5-year-olds saved the day by being 5-year-olds. You know, maybe if they really wanted to torture this poor guy, they could have tormented the soldier with all the transgenderism they learned in kindergarten.
This is true, but being that I think it's Jovan Collazo was 23. He probably was well aware of all that type of curriculum because he probably sat through it himself. But let's take a look at the news and how they explained and talked to the bus driver and what he had to say about it.
This was the heart-stopping moment an Army trainee used a rifle to hijack a South Carolina school bus with 18 children inside earlier this month. Bus driver Kenneth Corbin keeping his cool and the children safe for 6 painstaking minutes. 10-year-old Keandre James was one of the students on board.
I called my dad, and so I was telling him that I was being held hostage.
The gunman eventually letting Corbin and the children get out to safety. Police identifying the gunman as 23-year-old Jovan Collazo. This morning, he remains in custody, facing 24 charges, including 19 counts of kidnapping. A veteran school bus driver, Corbin had recently completed annual training about what to do if a bus is taken hostage.
You can see and hear how calm he was, how controlled he was, and how his training was put to good use.
Well, I think we were talking about kindergartners. Obviously, some of the kids were a little older. But you know what comes to my mind? I don't know how many of you, I'm dating myself now, that great 1970s movie Dirty Harry. I don't know if you saw it, Katie, but it's
Clint Eastwood.
Harry Callahan, you remember?
I mean, honestly, it's a classic.
It's a classic. And at the very last scene is the school bus driver hijacked by our Scorpio killer, right? And that had a very different ending when Harry Callahan climbed on top of that bus. If you haven't seen the end of that show, go ahead. No Harry Callahan blowing away punks into the river at the end of this show and protecting little kids. Nevertheless, the bus driver held his calm very well, and those little kids, they were very bright and happy. And then they managed to get this poor guy to just get off the bus. That's what you want.
And what happened is that Collazo had gotten onto the bus, and he basically, I guess, just was hitchhiking. So, of course, we're going to hitchhike on a bus with children.
Obviously, we're dealing with somebody with mental problems.
Exactly.
Here, right?
And so his main objective, according to Corbin, the bus driver, he said, he just wanted to get to the next town. And that's why you got to love kindergartners and children, because even though it may seem, they said it was 6 minutes, in 6 minutes, kindergartners can annoy people enough to make them stop the bus. Let's listen to what Corbin had to say, though.
As we were traveling, I guess he realized there were several students, at the rear of the bus and kind of scattered throughout the bus, and he decided to move all the students up front. So he got, I guess, to keep us all in close proximity. And when he did that, especially in some of my kindergartens, they started asking them questions as to asked him, was he a soldier? And he answered, well, it seemed like he hesitantly answered, but he said, yes, I'm a soldier. And then they wanted to know why. They asked him, why are you doing this? And he never did have an answer for that one. Then they asked, was he going to hurt them? He said no. And then they asked, was they going to hurt our bus driver? And he said no. All I'm going to do is take y'all and just put you off the bus. And from that point, it seemed like he sensed more questions coming, and it seemed like, I guess something clicked on his mind and said, enough already. And he just told me to stop the bus, and y'all just stop the bus right here and just get off.
Well, I think it's probably less the intervention of little kids than it was the realization that this was kind of a bad news. He was trying to commandeer the bus as a taxi. All he wanted was a taxi ride to the next town about 20 minutes away. And I think as he was sitting there thinking about this, listening to those little kids, it dawned on him, this might not have been the best way to go.
Well, of course not. And when they ask, are you going to hurt us? If you actually, I guess, in that situation, you're the one who stole the bus and you have a gun and the lives of children behind you, it could take just that one question to be like, oh, shoot, I went about this the wrong way. Either way, it's really good of what happened. The calm, cool, collective Corbin being the bus driver, keeping those kids safe. It's a good ending in the end because Collazo then was arrested. We'll see what becomes of him, but at least everyone's safe.
There was an alternative ending, which could have gone like this. I know what you're thinking, punk. Did I fire 5 shots or 6? In all this excitement, I don't seem to remember myself. But being that this is a .44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and can blow your head clean off, I'd think twice before you tested it.
Well, we're going to jump from one bus story to another bus story, but unfortunately, this is not a good, happy ending type bus story. It's out of Collier County in Florida, where a mom says that her son actually came home from school with marks on his body, and she says it was the result of a bus driver tying him down really tight with a seatbelt. Now, the mom is Carla Thurkettle, and she said that back at the very end of March, she saw a photo of her son Parker. And apparently the photo was taken by a fellow student. And according to the mom, the bus driver had restrained Parker on the bus with a seatbelt tightly wrapped twice around him because he had stuck his head into the aisle on a different day, and that when the bus was moving, and that this is some sort of, I guess, punishment. Let's take a look at what the news had to say.
Someone was able to treat my son in this fashion. He's not a dog.
She says on March 30th, she saw this photo of her son Parker taken by a fellow student. According to Thurkettle, the bus driver restrained Parker on the bus with a seatbelt tightly wrapped twice around him because he had stuck his head in the aisle on another day while the bus was moving.
My husband lifted up his shirt once he saw the picture of it, lifted up his shirt, and you could see the indentation or the red marks from how the seatbelt was wrapped around him.
But Thurkettle says no one ever notified her that her son was disciplined. She feels the bus driver went too far.
I feel helpless as a parent that I can't protect my children. I entrusted the school and I entrusted the transportation department with my son's safety, and I feel like that's been violated.
With all due respect, madam, I think what happened to your kid is a shame. I am stunned that simply doing this on a bus now, sticking your head into an aisle, is a violation. I thought the kid was dancing around or sticking his butt out the window mooning people. Apparently all the kid did was stick his head in the aisle. All right. But you aren't helpless. There is something you can do. Get your kid out of these dysfunctional schools. Everything from recess to gym class to the bus ride home and back to math class to lunch. There's no safe spaces. It is a cluster blank of confusion and unprofessionalism. You are not powerless. You get them out. Just get them out and find an alternative way to educate your kid. At this point, your justified anger and hurt feelings, the answer is the adult answer. You have choice. Use it.
Yeah, and basically, when Mom said that, the first thing that came to my mind is you don't have to feel helpless, and you can't entrust the school, and you can't entrust the transportation. You can only entrust in yourself and your family.
That's right.
And you need to take care of that first. You can't, I guess, ship it out, if you will, to anyone outside of that. Because as we talk about on the Dr. Duke Show every single day, the schools are where the danger zones are. The safe spaces are at home. So according to the sheriff's office, they said they investigated, and the incident, they followed up with the Florida Department of Children and Families investigation, and no new information at this point has been provided.
Well, clearly there are cameras all over those buses, right? I mean, so obviously somebody's checking out the footage here. I find it very hard to believe, to be honest with you, that a simple poking the head into the aisle, there's got to be more going on, doesn't there? I mean, if that's all that happened, and not even on the very day it happened, by the way. So apparently this was the next day, right? So some bus driver remembered and was really angry about some little boy sticking his head in the aisle. So much so that 24 hours or whatever it was later, that grudge was still there. So when I knew exactly which little boy it was, because when he got back on the bus, you lashed him to the mast like Odysseus fighting the sirens, right?
And once you said latch, I was like, oh, Odysseus is
You knew it was coming. Sadly, none of our public school kids will know what I'm talking about anymore.
This is true. What is interesting, though, the way you say, like, oh, I can't believe it would just be for just doing that. But we have many instances of something in schools where the kid is, oh, just doing that. And then the punishment greatly not fitting at all to what the crime was. I can believe that a bus driver, an adult for the school system, for the transportation system, would take a seatbelt and wrap the kid around it twice. Again, I don't know the severity of what happened. We're going with what the kid took the picture of Parker, and then what mom saw, and then the marks, and we don't have the whole story. And when you don't have the whole story, you end up getting riots in the streets for an entire year, George Floyd.
I think the entire underlying soundtrack for this particular story should be the song. Remember from the Test Crash
song.
Dummies? That should be the theme of this.
Millennials have no use for God. They either don't believe or they don't care. And that's coming out of the American Worldview Inventory from Arizona Christian University's Cultural Research Center. They did a survey, okay, and they found that 43% of millennials, those of us being born between 1984 and 2002, or I guess you could go on either side by a year or two, depending on who's defining millennial.
Are you in that group?
Those of us.
You are in that group.
I am in that group. So they said that they don't know, care, or believe that God exists. And only 57% of millennials said that they were Christian. What do you think of that?
I think it's
Gen
not surprising.
Xer?
I think it's going to get a lot worse over the years. And, and I've made this point before. America, be sad for your country rejecting Christianity. Don't be sad for Christianity. Because Christianity was never meant to be a religion of prosperity. It was never meant to be the religion that got so comfortable and lazy that you could be a Christian without having to sacrifice anything, where you could be a Christian, and that meant basically showing up to church every Easter and every Christmas, and that was about the end of it. Christianity was never meant to be Joel Osteen's prosperity gospel. It was never meant to be that. Jesus Christ spent his time with the hopeless and the helpless. He spent all his time with the low and the broken and the forgotten. We have been called to do the same thing. So when we're sitting in our rich air-conditioned houses with our cars in our garages and our many, 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 many comforts around us, it's just real hard to be Christian. And the fact that our kids add to that, they just don't care, shows you how badly we have behaved as Christian parents.
I'm glad you made that point, because I like to make the point several times, just on anything, is that yes, every generation blames the one before, and my generation is the worst, and all this. The millennials got to be on their own part for their own independent agency, but they also had parents who also had parents who also had parents. So who's to blame or what's to blame? It's not just, you can't just look at the millennial and be like, those damn kids.
Look,
because I hear that.
I teach millennials in college.
You do.
And they don't know what they don't know. So when they say I don't care, they mean it. No one's ever bothered to explain to some of these kids. When I started teaching back in the college in the early 1990s in Indiana at Purdue University, a lot of farm kids, a a lot of first-generation college kids. Many of them were lukewarm about religion, or weren't interested much in it, but they all knew the foundational stories of the Bible. They all knew the fundamental narrative of Christianity. I would argue, here in Wisconsin in 2021, 75% of my students know nothing about the Bible. Most of those kids were raised in Christian families. They can't tell you anything about the Bible. They know nothing about Christ. They've never read the Gospels. They've never set foot in church, even though they say that their parents are both Christians. So this kind of apathy it's not something that's self-breeding. And with these kids, I find that to be true. In my university teaching the classics, I am constantly putting before them arguments for God and arguments for Christianity in particular because of the books that we're reading, things like Dante and Milton and the great Dostoevsky, the great Christian Western writers. And I'll tell you this, after they're exposed to a reason why they should care, a lot of them care. A lot of them care much more than they think they did. And so I guess I would say, let's consider millennials fat, prosperous, lazy, video game addicted millennials. Let's consider them the next great missionary field. Start sending missionaries not to bonga bonga. Start sending, where do you find millennials? Starbucks? So to Starbucks, and where else do you hang out, little millennial?
Well, there's a lot of millennials who hang out at Target.
Target? All right.
That's more of the millennial moms.
Let's start sending missionaries into Target with its gender-neutral bathrooms to try to do outreach, because the millennials are a clueless generation, but they're not a lost one. And they're capable of understanding, if somebody would dare take the time on an intellectual level, why you need God way more than God needs you, even though you think you have everything you need with a video game console and a coffee maker.
You better be a fancy coffee maker. But there is something like, and I've talked about this, and I go around and around in these discussions, where within one generation, it's, you can't label everyone like, the millennials, boom. First off, you're talking about a 20-year range. And I like to say, being the older millennials, they tend to have the parents who are the baby boomers, where the younger millennials have the parents who are the Gen Xers. And that
big difference.
That's a huge difference if you know anything about the stereotypes of each of those generations. But it's fascinating, getting back to specifically this I don't know or don't care if God exists or doesn't exist. The researchers actually found that you see the steep decline through the generations about whether or not they are Christian or believe in God. So those who said they are Christian, are you a Christian? 83% of the silent generation, those born between 1927 to 45. And if you know anything about American history, between 1927 and 1945, whoa, did a lot happen. There's a whole depression. There's this whole big war that happened. 83% of the silent gen are Christians. 79% are of the baby boomers, the next generation after the war. And then you get to the Gen Xers, and 70% of those people say they're Christian. And then we go down to 31%. And then within that, 31, 28, and 27% of those believe they don't care. So you're going with yes, a little bit less, yes, a little bit less, and then you get to, the millennials who just don't at all.
Well, and part of this has to do with the fact that Hollywood has gotten involved. Through the silent generation, pretty much through the baby boomers and into the very first part of Gen Ed, religion was either not dealt with at all on TV or it was treated rather neutral. You look at the way Hollywood represents priests and ministers and Christianity in general, you could expect a much more steep drop coming up.
And this is one other thing. You talk about this, about millennials not knowing what they don't know, or, maybe it used to be, okay, they're kind of apathetic about God, but now they actively put their fingers in their ears and they won't even listen. How dare you? It goes along to this question. They were asked, all these people were asked, do you believe that the phrase, you treat others as you want them to treat you? And that also goes down. 90% of the silent generation says, you know what? I want to be treated the way I treat others. 81% of the boomers say, yep. 53% of the Gen Xers, and then only 48% of millennials say that you treat others as you want them to treat you.
So in other words, we've bred angry Antifa kids who think that in their own personal self-worth, they have a right to treat people worse.
And when they say the follow-up question or statement is, do you believe that you get even with people who have wronged you? The silent generation, only 1 in 10 of them would say, yeah, I'm going to, get even. 12% of the boomers say they would get even. 33% of the Gen Xers, and then 38% of the millennials. So there's a huge jump, though, I think, in the Gen Xers, and then into
and when you ask yourself, where does cancel culture come from? Intolerant, unforgiving, nasty, vindictive people? Voila. It's time for some real classic education here in all this politics. We got the great Walter E. Williams, one of the pioneers of conservative economics. He was a ardent, passionate follower of people like Milton Friedman. Ultimately, he traces his economic policies back to the great Adam Smith, who we talked about on the show all of last week. Walter E. Williams died in 2020. He was a substitute on the Rush Limbaugh show. He was a great sit-in host. Way more than just a conservative economic professor. He was very much a conservative across all aspects of his life. He was a professor at George Mason University, as well as a syndicated columnist. His writings appeared all over the place, including Town Hall, WND, even Jewish World Review. So we're going to spend this week honoring the conservative economic ideas of Walter E. Williams. And here are a couple quotes from Walt. Reduced employment opportunity is one effect of minimum wage legislation. Duh, you raise the minimum wage and job applications and job ability goes down. The minimum wage law has imposed incalculable harm on the disadvantaged members of our society. The only moral thing to do is repeal it, right? In other words, you've taken jobs away from high school kids who might cut their teeth on the first job because those jobs have to pay enough now that adults who pursue second careers take those jobs. How about this quote? Powerful government tends to draw into it people with bloated egos, people who think they know more than everyone else and have little hesitance in coercing their fellow man. Or, as Nobel laureate Friedrich Hayek said, quote, in government, the scum rises to the top. Amen. How about this final quote from Walter Williams for the day? I believe in helping our fellow man in need. I believe that reaching into your own pocket to help someone in need is praiseworthy and laudable. Reaching into somebody else's pockets to help your fellow man in need is despicable. And of those of us who are Christians, I am very sure that when God gave Moses the commandment, thou shalt not steal, he did not mean unless you get a majority vote in Congress. No, sir, I don't think he believed that at all.
All right, those are our stories for today. If you have a question for us, please feel free to drop it into the mailbag by emailing askduke@fpeusa.org. And if you enjoy our content, please consider joining our Patriot Club. Your one-time $99 tax-deductible donation allows Duke and myself to keep bringing you these stories every day. All you have to do to sign up is visit patriotclub.us. That's patriotclub.us. And as a thank you, we will ship you our signature tumbler.
And it was somewhere during the period of the millennials that saying Duke and me became Duke and myself. It's a millennial thing. Don't even worry about it. And that's going to do it for this show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie herself. Until next time, stay educated, my friends, even when it comes to grammar.